John's discussion. Jennifer, you have a question?
John, that was excellent, first of all. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. A little off topic of what you talked about, I'm particularly fascinated by your connection to the relationship between Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and the Pope. And I would love to hear just a little bit about that.
First, two things. First of all, the Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were ideologically soulmates. They met each other in '75, just after she was elected leader, when he was on a visit to England. The meeting went on far longer than was expected in the diaries and so on. And he then promised and did to send all of his radio talks and speeches to her thereafter, and his columns, and he did so, and she read them. So they knew they were on the same page. Now, initially, she by the way was strongly supportive of his election. The first test of that relationship came when she went on her first state visit to Reagan's White House in 1981. On that occasion, Reagan's own people were dissing Mrs. T in congressional committees for the failure of her policy, which certainly wasn't doing well in '81. And they urged him to distance himself from her, to say that Reaganomics was quite different from Thatcher politics. Far from doing so, he made the most striking statement of his support for her policies. He said in both cases that we must stick to these policies. I forget the actual phrase now. It was something like, "We will soon be home safe. We will be home safe and soon enough." And he made the speech, and then he did something else. As a matter of formality and diplomacy, the president gives a dinner to the visiting statesman, but does not accept the invitation that is always issued to go to the embassy the following night that the visitor gives. On this occasion, normally the vice president goes. On this occasion, he went. They forged a relationship at this point, which ran into some difficulties over Grenada and points in the Falklands War, but which fundamentally remained rock solid and was the basis for, I think, the victory of the West in the Cold War, particularly for the strength of the American position in Europe. Did they always see eye to eye? I mentioned that they didn't always. And at first, Mrs. Thatcher, I think, was inclined to think that he was a kind of a lazy, gifted genius. I mean, she couldn't quite understand how he succeeded when he didn't seem to have all the facts at his fingers and so on. Whereas she's a scholarship girl. She's never stopped being the clever scholarship girl. She all her life she she mastered everything. She was a very successful tax lawyer. That will tell you something about her ability in that area. So in the early '80s, there's no doubt about it, she did say some wounding things about him to colleagues. And I've spoken to some of them and so on. But she changed her mind about that. She changed her mind about it sometime in the mid-'80s when she realized that, Reagan couldn't have achieved these amazing things by accident. That he set the parameters for his administration, let other people get on with it, but every now and then something would come along where they would bring something to him and he would always settle it in the right direction. And therefore, as I say, the relationship continued. It became very, very warm, I would say. In addition to being a strong political alliance, it became a firm friendship, which continued after the both of them had left office. And it's very significant that Nancy Reagan asked Mrs. Thatcher to accompany her from the funeral in Washington to the burial and so on. There was one of Mrs. Thatcher's coolest and most cynical aides, a man called her foreign policy advisor. I think he was named Percy. Come back to me. He said in a memoir. He said they made an interesting combination. He said the lazy, genial ex-actor who was so happy to delegate material, and the hard-working, hard-driving woman who simply had to master every detail of the policy. I've always said that they were oil and vinegar, no prize for guessing who was which. But that oil and vinegar produced a terrific salad dressing, and it is a major factor. The relationship with the Pope, very quickly. the pivotal figure here is Reagan. Reagan was close to Thatcher and he was close to the Pope. The Pope and Mrs. Thatcher had respect for each other, but they simply didn't have the same level of interaction, same level of discussion. The key to understanding that relationship, it seems to me, is the first meeting that the Pope had with Reagan. I think it's in '82. But it's a famous meeting because Reagan fell asleep in the press conference, and people sort of, he said later, well, I figure, people say hard work never kills anyone, but I figure, why take a chance? But the fact was, he was very much on top of his brief. And at that meeting, which was, there were only two of them who were present, nobody else, but when the Pope came out, he told the two cardinals who spoke to him, Reagan's a man of peace. He's a genuine disarmer, and so on. Now, the rest of us didn't find out about Reagan's commitment to Star Wars and the mutual disarmament until really, I suppose, fully until the Reykjavik summit. But he told the Pope that early on, and that effectively meant the Pope satisfied himself that Reagan was a man of peace, and that across the range of policies, the Vatican could therefore be happier about being associated with or taking similar stands, even in relation to Latin America, where the Church was initially very suspicious of Reagan and American foreign policy. So Reagan is this pivotal figure in the triangular relationship, but as I say, I thought it stems from that first meeting in '82. But the most remarkable thing, go and look at Reagan's death, go and look at the telegram that John Paul II sent to Mrs. Reagan. It's a very powerful telegram, hard to read without being very moved by it, because as far as a Pope can, he more or less said Reagan's in heaven, He referred to him as a noble soul. And it's there's no doubt that there were others who played a part. One has to give credit to Kohl, one has to give credit to the leaders of Eastern Europe like Lech Wałęsa, Václav Havel. But I think that without those three figures, the Cold War would have lasted longer. And when it ended, it wouldn't have ended as peaceably as it did. And the whole world ought to be grateful for that.
GrokTV.